So the Flint water crisis really highlighted the invisible threats that are underlying the streets of that city and to some extent other large cities around the country. But much less is known about the state of water infrastructure in smaller communities, particularly smaller communities around the state. To start to fill that gap, we covered drinking water infrastructure on the Michigan Public Policy Survey last spring. For some background, the Michigan Public Policy Survey is a biannual survey that goes out to the 1,856 local units of government in the state of Michigan. We always carry issues around fiscal operations or fiscal health and operations, but we cover new content all the time. And the first time that we covered drinking water infrastructure really in depth was spring 2016. What I'm going to present to you today is just a taste of some of that data. And you should also know that we have similar data on Great Lakes water quality policy that you can ask me about if you want in Q&A. So one of the questions that we asked is, to what extent are these issues problems for your drinking water infrastructure? And you can see the biggest problem identified by local governments is aging infrastructure and breaking pipes. 37% of local governments note that. But there are other big issues of concern are affordability of water and bill delinquency, water source safety. Now, this is 17% of local officials that have a shared water system say that they're concerned about threats to water source quality. But this is also an issue for the more rural governments that don't have shared water systems, that rely entirely on private wells. Overall, in the state, on the order of 250 local governments say that they are concerned about the quality of about threats to their water source quality. And then you can see, in terms of lead, the thing that kind of prompted us to look at this issue, there's much less concern in terms of number of jurisdictions, though certainly the impact of lead in drinking water is top of the list. This slide is intended to highlight how we can take this data and break it down based on the fiscal conditions in that jurisdiction. So this is looking at affordability of water or delinquency on bills based on the jurisdiction's own fiscal stress. So those in high stress are those that are needing an emergency manager. Those jurisdictions in low stress are those that are in a good financial condition. And you can see in communities that have high fiscal stress themselves, they also say that there's a problem with affordability for their residents in paying their water bill. So 50% of jurisdictions that are in high fiscal stress say that water affordability is a problem, which means there's less of a gap for them to be able to fill and help for those jurisdictions to fill in those communities. By contrast, in communities that themselves are in low fiscal stress, they say that about 22% say that water affordability is a problem for their residents. And this slide is highlighting how our data on what local officials believe might be coupled with public opinion data. So one of the questions that we ask local officials is, would you support increasing water rates in your jurisdiction? We also ask them whether the majority of their board or council would support increasing water rates, and whether they think a majority of their citizens would support increasing water rates. And here you can see local officials themselves say, we're willing to increase water rates, but most of them do not think that their citizens would be willing to increase water rates. So you can imagine doing a public opinion poll and comparing what local officials think to what local officials think their communities think to what the public actually says themselves. There is much more data underlying all of this. Again, this was just to whet your appetite. We've got a 20-page report out on the results from the survey. We include knowledge or not of the source of the water, changes in infrastructure conditions, the current funding sources and local officials' perceptions of the need that they need for funding water infrastructure, governmental oversight. I didn't mention earlier, we have a great response rate, 74% across the state. So what this means is that we can break down this data by region, by population size of the jurisdiction, by county. If there's a water system that crosses more than a dozen jurisdictions, I can give you data on what local officials in that water system said. If you are interested, please let me know. All of this data is freely available. I can give it to you to use, do the analysis yourself, or you can contact me and I can run some special analyses for you. And I did it in 5 minutes.